Welcome back to the channel. Sometimes, the most unsettling mysteries do not begin in dark alleyways or stormy nights. They start on an ordinary morning, in an ordinary neighborhood, with someone simply stepping out the front door. And that is exactly where today's story takes us. Welcome back, everyone. I am really glad you are here, settling in for another quiet, thoughtful look at a case that continues to puzzle both investigators and anyone who hears it. Tonight, we are going to walk through the final known moments of a young man whose disappearance still leaves a long shadow over the community he called home. On June 13, 2001, 19-year-old Jason Jolkowski woke up to what should have been a completely normal day in Omaha, Nebraska. Nothing unusual. Nothing dramatic, just a simple plan. His car was not working properly, so a coworker offered to give him a ride to his job. All Jason had to do was walk the short distance from his house to Benson High School, the easy meeting point they agreed on. It was a route he knew, a route anyone could walk without thinking twice. Just a few blocks, a matter of minutes. That small walk, less than the length of a casual morning stroll, became the center of one of the most baffling missing person cases in modern American history. Jason left his home wearing his work clothes and carrying his things as usual. His family remembered nothing unusual about his mood. He was not in a hurry. He was not upset, and he was not acting out of character in any way. A neighbor even saw him outside moments before he began the walk, pulling in his family's trash cans, doing a simple chore that showed he fully expected to go about a completely ordinary day. But from the moment he stepped away from his home, Jason was never seen again. No neighbors reported seeing him walk down the street. No one at the school spotted him waiting. And that short route, just 8 blocks, produced no clues, no lost items, no sign of an unexpected detour. It was as if the space between his front door and the school simply erased all evidence of his presence. When people talk about Jason's disappearance, they often describe it as vanishing into thin air, not because the phrase is dramatic, but because there is genuinely no trace of what happened after he left home. There were no working cameras pointing toward his route, no calls made from his phone, and no activity on any of his accounts afterward. What should have been the safest, most predictable part of someone's day became a blank space that has lasted for more than 2 decades. And that is why this story continues to weigh heavily on those who follow it. Jason was not traveling somewhere far. He was not meeting strangers. He was not doing anything risky. He was simply walking a short, familiar path on a quiet morning. And somehow, that was enough for the world to lose sight of him completely. It is hard to imagine someone vanishing on a long road trip or disappearing during a hike deep in the wilderness. Those situations, while frightening, at least offer the mind a place to start. Twists in the path, lonely stretches of highway. A moment where something unexpected might have unfolded. But Jason's case removes all of that. His walk was so short, so ordinary, and so familiar that the absence of answers becomes even more difficult to accept. Jason's destination, Benson High School, was not far at all from the home he shared with his parents and brother. Roughly 8 blocks, depending on the path he chose. It might have been 10 minutes, maybe a little more if he walked slowly. It was the kind of distance where you would not bother checking the weather, where you would not call ahead to say you were on your way, where you certainly would not expect anything unusual to happen. It was simply a walk through a residential neighborhood, surrounded by houses, cars, and people getting ready for the day. And that is exactly what makes this part of the story so unnerving. There were no major intersections he needed to cross, no isolated areas, no construction sites or detours, just sidewalks, front yards, and the quiet rhythm of a normal morning in suburban Omaha. The kind of setting where, if something out of the ordinary did happen, it would most likely be noticed. Yet nothing was noticed at all. Imagine how short 8 blocks really are. If you stood at one end, you might even be able to see halfway down the stretch. If someone paused on their porch, watering plants or grabbing the morning paper, they would likely see anyone passing through. And still no one saw Jason at any point on that route. Not leaving the street. Not cutting across a lawn. Not stepping toward the school. His coworker waited for him at the meeting point, expecting to see him appear around the corner at any moment. But he never came. That tiny, familiar distance, the kind that millions of people walk every day, became an empty space. A gap where nothing can be confirmed. A place where time seemed to stop just long enough for everything to go silent. And when investigators retraced his possible routes, it did not help. The sidewalks looked the same. The houses stood in their places. Life carried on around the area as usual. Yet the space between point A and point B held no clues, no dropped items, no footprints, no sign of a sudden turn or unexpected event. For a short walk to become a complete mystery, every single minute had to fall perfectly into place. And that is part of what makes this case so haunting. Jason did not disappear in the middle of nowhere. He disappeared in the middle of everyday life. And that short distance, those few blocks, became a void that no one has been able to explain for more than 20 years. One of the details that makes this case feel even more surreal is just how recently Jason was seen before everything went silent. In many disappearances, the final sighting happens hours before the person is reported missing, leaving a broad window where events could have unfolded. But in Jason's case, the last confirmed sighting happened just minutes before he was supposed to begin his short walk. A neighbor saw him outside, pulling the family's trash cans toward the house. It was a simple, everyday task, one of those things you do without thinking, almost on autopilot. The neighbor did not report anything odd about Jason's appearance, his behavior, or the environment around him. No unusual vehicles. No strangers nearby. Nothing that suggested anything was about to shift in the next few minutes. That small detail adds a strange weight to the timeline. It tells us Jason was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing something routine, minutes before he left the safety of home. It also tells us he was not rushing, stressed, or distracted. He was not making phone calls or changing plans. He was simply getting ready for his day, the way any responsible young adult would. From that confirmed moment, the timeline becomes razor thin. If we consider the estimate that he disappeared roughly 10 minutes later, it means whatever happened, whatever prevented him from reaching the school, occurred within a very narrow sliver of time. Such a short window should, in theory, make a case easier to track. After all, fewer minutes usually mean fewer possibilities. Yet here, the opposite happened. The neighbor's sighting becomes one of the last solid pieces of the puzzle. After that moment, the trail ends. It is not that the timeline becomes blurry. It is that the timeline simply stops. There is no next sighting, no second neighbor glancing out a window, no passerby crossing paths with him. In a suburban neighborhood, during daylight hours, with people beginning their regular routines, Jason somehow managed to leave no trace. The neighbor's account also reinforces how grounded and normal that morning truly was. It was not the start of a dramatic sequence. It was the start of a completely predictable day. And yet, somewhere after those trash cans were rolled in, something disrupted that normalcy in a way that no one was able to witness. This detail, the last ordinary moment before an extraordinary mystery, has stayed with the people who follow this case, because it captures something deeply unsettling. The idea that a person can be present, visible, fully part of everyday life, 1 minute, and completely unaccounted for, the next. That sighting is the last flicker of certainty before the story enters its long, unbroken silence. When Jason stepped out for that short walk to meet his coworker, there was every expectation that he would arrive within minutes. His coworker had already driven to Benson High School, their usual meet-up spot, and was waiting for him in the parking lot. It was a clear, calm morning. Nothing seemed out of place. Nothing suggested the slightest hint of a disruption. But minute by minute, Jason did not appear. At first, it was probably just a matter of patience. Maybe he needed a moment to gather his belongings. Maybe he started the walk a little late. Maybe he paused to handle something small at home. These are the everyday delays we all experience, and the kind we do not think twice about. But after a while, the wait became noticeably long enough for concern to start creeping in. The coworker, who knew Jason well enough to understand his habits, eventually called the house to see what was going on. That call is an important moment in this story. It revealed the first real sign that something was wrong. Jason had already left home. He should have been on the way. He should have already been within eyesight of the school entrance. And yet, he was not. When the family retraced the possibilities, something deeply strange emerged. No one had seen Jason along the route. Not a neighbor stepping outside for morning errands. Not someone driving to work. Not anyone walking a dog, watering a garden, or checking the mail. It is extremely unusual for a person to walk through a populated residential area in daylight and leave no visual record, not even a momentary glimpse from someone's window. Even stranger, the location where he was supposed to meet the coworker was not isolated. A school parking lot in a suburban neighborhood is an open, visible environment. If Jason had reached the school and waited, someone would have noticed a young man standing there. If he had decided to walk a different direction, someone likely would have seen him detour. But the day passed, with no confirmation of his presence anywhere beyond his neighborhood driveway. This is the point where the case drifts into unsettling territory. The space between Jason's home and the school becomes a blank map, an empty corridor where nothing was observed, nothing was heard, and nothing was found. It is not only that Jason did not arrive, it is that the world did not record his movement in any way. For a disappearance to occur during such an ordinary, compact moment of the day feels almost impossible. And yet, that impossibility is what defines the case. What should have been the simplest part of an everyday routine, instead, became an unanswered question, one that has remained suspended in time for more than 2 decades. The meeting point stayed empty. The short route gave no clues, and the morning that was supposed to begin like any other never followed its expected path. One of the most striking aspects of Jason's disappearance is the complete absence of anything that would normally signal what happened during those missing minutes. In many cases, investigators rely on items left behind: a dropped wallet, a shoe, a phone, a backpack, something that hints at a direction, an unexpected stop, or even a moment of distress. But with Jason, there was nothing. Not a single trace. When his family realized he never reached the school and began checking the area, they expected at least some small clue. After all, it was a residential neighborhood filled with lawns, driveways, and sidewalks. If Jason had stumbled, someone would have found evidence of that. If he had paused somewhere, someone might have noticed. If he had changed direction, a camera or a witness might have picked up at least a passing glance. But the search turned up absolutely empty. No clothing, no bag, no personal items, no scuff marks, no dropped objects, nothing that suggested any form of physical confrontation or accidental injury. The lack of belongings is important for another reason. Jason was on his way to work. He had his uniform, his lunch, his essentials, things someone would not willingly abandon if they planned to continue with their day. The absence of those items from the environment suggests he never had the chance to set anything down or leave anything behind. Whatever occurred happened so quickly or so quietly that nothing fell, nothing scattered, nothing marked the moment. Investigators also found no signs of a struggle on lawns, sidewalks, or streets along the route. No damaged shrubbery, no scrape marks, no unusual tire tracks. It was as if the neighborhood remained completely untouched during the time Jason walked through it, or should have walked through it. This level of emptiness in the evidence is incredibly rare in missing person cases, especially those that happen in broad daylight. It leaves investigators with an almost philosophical challenge. How do you investigate an event that leaves absolutely nothing behind, without items to test, without tracks to follow, without any physical clue to interpret? The search hit a dead end almost immediately. It is not only the lack of evidence that troubles people, it is the normalcy of the environment. This was not an unfamiliar hiking trail or an isolated rural road. It was a suburban neighborhood where small children waited for buses, adults left for work, and people walked pets. Noise, movement, and daily routines filled the area. In a setting like this, something out of place usually stands out. But in Jason's case, the morning revealed nothing out of place at all. And that emptiness, the complete void of physical clues, became one of the strongest reasons why the case remains unsolved. Without evidence, theories remain theories, possibilities remain possibilities, and the short stretch of neighborhood that should have offered answers continues to hold nothing but silence. In most modern investigations, especially those involving disappearances in populated areas, security cameras play a critical role. A single frame, a blur of movement, a passing figure, a vehicle turning at just the right moment can unlock an entire timeline. Cameras do not forget. Cameras do not blink. And cameras do not wrongly assume that everything is normal. But in Jason's case, the very technology that could have provided clarity simply was not there. In 2001, home security systems were not common. Neighborhoods did not have doorbell cameras. Schools did not have the same level of surveillance they do today. Even businesses, depending on their size, often had limited or outdated equipment. The stretch of sidewalk Jason would have walked was not covered by any reliable camera, and the few cameras in the area either were not pointed toward the street or were not functioning at the time. This absence of visual documentation is one of the biggest reasons the case has endured as a mystery for so long. Without footage, investigators can't confirm whether Jason even started walking in the direction of the school. They can't determine if he turned down a side street. They can't tell if a vehicle approached him. They can't identify whether someone familiar called out to him from a porch, a driveway, or a parked car. Every possibility becomes equally valid and equally frustrating. The lack of cameras also means investigators had no way to verify potential reports. If someone later believed they might have seen something unusual that morning, there was no visual evidence to cross-check their memory. No timestamp to compare. No confirmation that could strengthen or rule out a lead. Even the school, where he was supposed to meet his coworker, did not provide useful footage. Any existing cameras did not point toward the meeting area, and none showed Jason arriving. That silence from the cameras created a hole in the timeline, one that became permanent. In a modern context, this case would have been entirely different. Today, nearly every street has at least one camera watching over it. Doorbell systems, dash cams, storefronts, traffic lights, school property, even hobbyist setups. A person walking 8 blocks through a residential neighborhood in daylight would almost certainly be captured multiple times. Investigators today often call this the digital trail. And Jason's case unfolded just on the edge of the era before such trails became normal. It creates an eerie thought. If Jason had disappeared just a decade later, the cameras might have caught something small, tiny, but critical. A silhouette, a vehicle, a direction, a pause, anything that could anchor the truth. Instead, the path he took remains unrecorded. Every second of that walk, if he even began, it exists only in imagination, speculation, and memory. And without cameras to witness his steps, the neighborhood where he vanished became a place where an entire story unfolded with no surviving evidence, leaving behind only questions that grow heavier each passing year. One of the most revealing indicators in any missing person investigation is what comes after the final sighting. Even when someone cannot be physically found, their digital or financial trail often continues small movements that suggest where they might have gone, or at least hint at what they intended to do. But in Jason's case, every part of that trail went silent immediately, as if someone simply turned off the switch. After he failed to arrive at the meeting point, investigators quickly checked the basics: his bank account, his debit card, his phone records, and anything that might show a clue: an attempted withdrawal, a call, a message, a purchase, a login, even a small transaction. They found none. Nothing happened afterward. This kind of complete inactivity is unusual, especially for a young adult who had plans, routines, and responsibilities. Jason was not someone preparing to leave his life behind. He had a job he cared about. He had family who saw him that morning. He had recently been making future plans, taking new steps toward adulthood. People who intend to disappear rarely do so in the most abrupt, unplanned moment of the morning, right when they are preparing to go to work. And they certainly do not do it without making any digital movement afterward. Investigators also found no signs that Jason had packed belongings, withdrawn money beforehand, or made secret calls. There was nothing to suggest he was distressed or planning a sudden change in direction. Everything in his life looked stable, ordinary, and grounded. That absence of warning signs adds another layer of confusion. It is unlikely he voluntarily vanished, and yet there is no evidence of an external event either. His phone never pinged another tower. His bank card was never used again. His accounts remained untouched for years. In the world of missing person cases, these long periods of silence normally point toward a single conclusion: the person did not continue their daily life after the moment they went missing. And when it happens instantly, within minutes of the last confirmed sighting, it narrows the window even further. Another troubling thought emerges from this silence. If someone else had been involved, they clearly did not attempt to use any of Jason's items. Many cases break open when a phone is turned on, a card is used, or an ID is found. But here, nothing surfaced. It is as if every aspect of his life froze in time at the exact moment he stepped away from home. Family members often describe this silence as the hardest part. There is no breadcrumb trail to follow, no small update to cling to, no signs that Jason reached another street, building, or intersection. The digital world offers no whisper of where he went or what happened next. It simply stopped instantly and completely, and that lack of any post-disappearance activity remains one of the strongest indicators that whatever happened to Jason occurred quickly, unexpectedly, and within the smallest stretch of time, a moment that left absolutely nothing behind. When Jason did not return home and was not found at the school, his family contacted the police, hoping they could help fill in the missing pieces. But instead of a quick, active search, the early stages of the investigation moved slowly, far more slowly than a case like this needed. And that slow start became one of the most painful points for Jason's family, because every hour lost in a disappearance like this makes the truth that much harder to uncover. In 2001, procedures surrounding missing adults were stricter and more rigid than they are today. It was not uncommon for authorities to wait before launching a full investigation, operating on the assumption that many adults simply needed time or had left voluntarily. But Jason did not fit that category. He was not traveling, he was not in conflict, and he was not showing signs of wanting to distance himself from family or work. He left his home on a short walk and never arrived. Despite this, the initial response was not urgent. The early hours passed without a neighborhood-wide canvass, without immediate interviews of potential witnesses, and without a rapid search of the 8-block route. Those delays meant that any tiny clue, anything dropped on the sidewalk, any unusual vehicle parked nearby, any neighbor who might have seen something could have been missed by the time investigators arrived. As days turned into weeks, the case became more complicated. Tips trickled in, but none held up. People called with hunches, guesses, or unrelated sightings from other cities, but none of them connected to Jason. Not one lead produced evidence. Not one lead pointed to a direction. The police had no suspects, no persons of interest, not even a solid theory rooted in fact. Neighborhood interviews also led nowhere. Residents were cooperative, but no one had seen Jason on the route. No one heard unusual noises. No one noticed a car stopping in a strange way or someone calling out from a driveway. It was as if the entire morning unfolded in silence, with no moment that stood out. Without witnesses, without evidence, and without suspects, investigators found themselves staring at a case with no foundation. They could not build timelines. They could not reconstruct paths. They could not eliminate possibilities. The case became suspended, open, but unmoving. Over the years, new investigators reviewed old documents, hoping a fresh set of eyes would spot something overlooked. But the file remained the same. No confirmed sightings, no suspicious individuals, no physical traces. Just a 19-year-old who stepped outside for a 10-minute walk and vanished between two familiar points in a neighborhood he knew well. And that early delay, those lost first hours and days, is something that has stayed with Jason's family. They have often said that if the search had begun sooner, maybe someone would have remembered a detail. Maybe the trail would not have gone cold so quickly. Maybe Jason's story would look different today. But the investigation's slow start created a silence that has never quite lifted. There are cases where details slowly unravel, where new information surfaces with time, and where even a single overlooked clue eventually becomes the thread that leads investigators forward. But Jason's case has none of those pieces. Instead, it has become known for something far more unsettling. A disappearance so complete, so silent, that people often describe it as if he simply vanished into thin air. Of course, no one truly disappears without cause. Real life does not work like magic. But when a case offers no physical evidence, no witness accounts, no sightings, no activity on financial or digital records, and no confirmed direction of travel, the human mind wants to fill that void. And in Jason's story, the void is enormous. It is the combination of impossibility and normalcy that makes the phrase feel strangely accurate. Jason was not walking through a forest, a highway, or a remote trail places where someone could realistically go unnoticed. He was walking through a quiet residential neighborhood in broad daylight. Houses sat on both sides of the street. People were getting ready for their day. Cars were leaving driveways. It was the kind of environment where someone, somewhere, should have seen at least a fragment of what happened. But nothing was seen. It was not just that the disappearance happened without noise. It happened without witnesses, without objects, without even a trace of direction. If he had turned back to the house, someone would have noticed. If he had walked a different route, a camera, person, or passing driver might have recorded a glimpse. If a vehicle had stopped near him, the sound alone could have drawn attention. Yet none of that happened, or at least none of it was reported or captured. This surreal absence of information is what shaped the way people talk about Jason's story. The phrase vanished into thin air is not used lightly. It is used because every traditional anchor point of an investigation is missing: time, direction, evidence, witnesses. Every category that normally builds a narrative is empty, forcing investigators to work with silence instead of structure. Families of missing persons often cling to patterns, signs that match other cases, clues that suggest similar scenarios. But Jason's case breaks those patterns. It does not resemble typical missing adult cases. It does not resemble abductions with clear evidence. It does not resemble voluntary disappearances. It sits in a category of its own, a puzzle without edges, a question without a starting point. And over the years, that phrase vanished into thin air has become both a description and a symbol, a reminder of how deeply unsettling it is when a person disappears in the middle of an ordinary moment, a reminder of how vulnerable even the most normal parts of daily life can be, and a reminder of the silence that still surrounds Jason's final known minutes. A silence that has stretched across more than 2 decades without offering a single concrete answer. In the aftermath of Jason's disappearance, his family faced something no one is ever prepared for, a silence so total that it felt impossible to move against. With no leads, no sightings, and no solid timeline to follow, they quickly realized that the traditional systems in place were not enough, not for them, and not for countless other families facing similar heartbreak. But instead of letting that silence close in, they chose to turn it into something meaningful. That choice became Project Jason, an organization founded by Jason's parents, dedicated to supporting families of missing loved ones. And in many ways, Project Jason stands as one of the few bright points in an otherwise painful story. When faced with the unknown, his family refused to accept isolation. They refused to accept confusion as the final state. They wanted to ensure that other families would not feel the same loneliness, the same fear, or the same frustration they encountered in those early days. Through Project Jason, they began offering guidance steps to take immediately after someone disappears, resources for dealing with law enforcement, ways to keep cases visible, and emotional support for the long and difficult waiting that often follows. What started as one family's response to a personal tragedy slowly expanded into a network of people connected by shared experiences. It brought awareness to the challenges families face when searching for answers, especially in the crucial early hours. But the organization did more than offer comfort. It helped change the landscape of how missing person cases were discussed. Through events, advocacy efforts, and educational material, Project Jason pushed for better systems, improved databases, quicker response protocols, and more structured communication between families and investigators. The organization emphasized that every case deserves urgency, regardless of age, circumstance, or assumed intent. For Jason's family, building Project Jason became a way to create movement in a place where their own case had none. They could not control the silence surrounding his disappearance, but they could make sure no other family faced the same quiet with no guidance. That mission continues to resonate, even decades later. Families across the United States still turn to Project Jason for help, reassurance, and the reminder that they are not alone in their search. There is something incredibly human, incredibly resilient, in the way Jason's family transformed their pain into something that could help others. The answers they wanted for their own son never came, but they ensured that countless other families would have support during their darkest moments. And while Project Jason cannot rewrite the past or explain what happened on that short walk in Omaha, it stands as one of the clearest testaments to Jason's story, that he mattered, that he still matters, and that the effort to help others in his name continues to create light in places where uncertainty once lived. One of the most lasting legacies of Jason's disappearance is not found in the case file, in witness reports, or in the small timeline of his final mourning. Instead, it is found in legislation, something that carries his name and continues to help families long after that silent walk in Omaha. After experiencing how difficult it was to get timely support and resources during the first days of the investigation, Jason's family pushed for systemic change. Their efforts eventually led to Jason's Law, a statewide initiative established in Nebraska. Jason's Law created an officially recognized, centralized missing persons database, a step that may sound simple today, but was not universal at the time. Before this law, missing person information was scattered between agencies. Some details sat with local police departments, others with state investigators, and still others never made it into shared records. Families often felt they were repeating themselves, restarting from the beginning with each new officer or department. This patchwork system created delays at moments when time mattered most. Jason's Law changed that. Once enacted, it required better coordination, faster data entry, and clearer communication between agencies. Cases involving missing adults, who were often overlooked because they were presumed capable of making independent decisions, were now treated with greater urgency. The law ensured that information moved quickly, that patterns were easier to identify, and that families no longer felt lost within the system. For Jason's family, seeing his name connected to something that could help others brought a quiet sense of purpose. They could not bring back the moment when swift action might have preserved clues in Jason's case. They could not rewrite the early delays or fill the silence that investigators later faced. But they could help ensure no other family endured the same uncertainties. The law stands as a statement. Every missing person matters, and every minute counts. Jason's Law also broadened public awareness. His story became more than a single case. It became a catalyst for reform. Media outlets highlighted the law whenever discussing policy changes, keeping Jason's name present in conversations about safety and investigative practices. Over time, the law supported hundreds of searches across Nebraska, creating a framework many other states eventually modeled or strengthened through their own programs. While Jason himself never saw the results of this change, the impact continues to ripple outward. It is a reminder that even in moments where answers never arrived, something meaningful still emerged. His disappearance revealed gaps in the system. His family's persistence helped close them. And the law that carries his name remains a quiet guardian for countless families navigating the most frightening uncertainty one can face. More than 2 decades have passed since Jason stepped out of his home for what should have been the simplest part of his day, a short walk down familiar streets. And yet, after all this time, the case remains as still and as silent as it was in those first unsettling hours. No new clues have surfaced. No credible leads have emerged. No evidence has been discovered that explains what happened during those few unaccounted-for minutes. As of 2025, the case continues to sit in a category that investigators rarely encounter, a disappearance, with no starting point and no ending point. Most missing person cases reveal some fragment of truth. Over time, a misplaced item found years later, a tip called in by someone who remembers something small, a discovery made during unrelated investigations. But Jason's case offers none of that movement. It has remained unchanged, untouched by the passing of time. Investigators who revisit the file describe the same challenge. There is simply nothing to build a theory upon. No direction of travel. No unusual behavior in the days leading up to his disappearance. No conflict, no evidence of planning, no pattern of distancing from family or responsibilities. Jason was not running from anything, and he was not heading towards something unknown. The day held no warning signs, no shifts in routine, no signals that he might change course. This absence leaves the case suspended in a strange, haunting space. It is neither cold in the traditional sense, because investigators still hope something might one day surface, nor active in the way cases revive with fresh leads. Instead, it remains open but unmoving, like a story paused mid-sentence for more than 20 years. True crime researchers often refer to Jason's case when discussing the rarest forms of disappearances, those that happen during short, predictable tasks within populated areas. His story is frequently brought up alongside the phrase, walk-distance disappearances, cases where someone vanishes while covering a small stretch of ground that should have been safe and uneventful. And among those cases, Jason's is considered one of the most perplexing in the United States. For his family, the passage of time has created a complicated mix of hope and heartbreak. Hope that one day, even the smallest clue will surface. Heartbreak that after all these years, the timeline remains frozen. They continue to keep Jason's name alive, continue to share his story, and continue to remind the public that answers can still emerge even after decades. But the truth remains. As of 2025, the mystery is exactly where it was in 2001. A short walk, a quiet morning, a young man preparing for an ordinary day, and then nothing. A void where explanation should be. A silence that still stretches across those 8 blocks, waiting for a moment that has yet to arrive. As we reach the end of Jason Jolkowski's story, we are left with a quiet kind of weight, the kind that settles over you when a mystery refuses to offer even a fragment of clarity. Jason did not disappear while traveling far from home, or while taking risks, or while stepping into unfamiliar places. He disappeared during one of the most ordinary moments a person can experience. A short morning walk, on a familiar street, in his own neighborhood, and somehow that simple stretch of time became the boundary between what we know and what we can only imagine. Looking back at the timeline, the silence becomes its own character in this story. Jason was seen doing a normal chore just minutes before he vanished. The walk he planned to take was short, predictable, surrounded by people beginning their day. There were no signs of trouble, no objects left behind, no unusual activity on cameras or in financial records. Everything was still, everything was ordinary, until suddenly it was not. And that shift happened so quickly and so quietly that it left nothing behind for investigators to follow. In the years since, Jason's family has shaped their grief into purpose. Project Jason was born from their determination to ensure no family feels lost in the early, confusing hours of a disappearance. Through their efforts, countless families have been supported, guided, and reminded that they do not have to navigate uncertainty alone. Jason's Law, too, stands as a real and lasting change, one that has strengthened missing person investigations across Nebraska and continues to help others long after Jason's trail went cold. Yet despite these powerful legacies, the central question remains unanswered. What happened during those missing minutes on that June morning? How did a young man, walking a route he knew by heart, leave behind no trace at all? It is a question that continues to echo through true crime discussions, documentaries, and forums, because cases like this remind us just how fragile and unexplained the world can sometimes be. And maybe that is why Jason's story stays with people. It is not just the mystery, it is the humanity at the center of it. A teenager heading to work, a family waiting for him to arrive, a community that expected nothing unusual, and a silence that has stretched for more than 2 decades, still waiting to be broken. Thank you for spending this time with me tonight, for listening, and for sitting with this story in a compassionate, thoughtful way. If you are watching this As part of a true crime series, please take a moment to share Jason's story or the story of someone missing in your own community. Visibility matters more than we realize. Until next time, I hope you stay safe, stay gentle with yourself, and take good care. Good night, everyone.